We'll do it live. We'll do it live. Welcome to After Further Review. Mark Furr, John Pelkey, a cocktail hour edition. This is episode number 116. Yes, I've got one as well. It's just a nice scotch, both Johnny and I. Jeff Taylor is our producer. He's the one that has to stay sober, although we don't know what he's drinking right now. We have no idea what's in that cup. But we are now going into another deep dive, folks. It's been a long time since our last deep dive, and our last deep dive was on 1968. Johnny did one in 1941. So I'm going to do another year one. That seems to work pretty well. We're going to do 1972, and we're going to break it down into three parts. It's a three-part series.
Goodness gracious.
Try and be like other podcasts and have
softly effortful.
Three-part series. Yes, it is. This is January through April. The next one will be May through August, and the final one will be September through December, which is quite eventful as well, but it's all eventful. So anyway, before we get going with 1972, Jeff, how are you, sir? I know this is an odd hour for you, and you have, your family isn't used to this hour. You doing a podcast, so I apologize for that.
I told you before, it literally is just a series of unfortunate events. My 3-year-old, we let her stay up Monday night to watch the Caps lose to the Bruins. And then yesterday she didn't take a nap very well. And so she's just in a weird mood. She's a woman. I know she's a little tiny one, but she's a woman. You know, her moods are subject to change.
Sure. And it's tough to bounce back. You know, it's like as you get older, it's tough to bounce back from a late night. When you're young, it's tough to bounce back. You know, there's that sweet spot between 15 and 45 where you can do anything you want.
It's a good
and
point.
then
45. Do you think it goes to 45?
She's just getting used to it, right?
Did you say 15 to 45?
I'm hoping not, because at the end of this year, I'll be on to the other.
I just threw that out there.
Wow. Because
I was going to say there's a fine line between Gerber and geriatric. It's not just the first 3 letters that match.
Yeah. If you're saying like when you can just like not get enough sleep and just burn the candle at both ends, I'm thinking 15 and 32. But for me, it was about a 17-year swath. Because after that, now I don't know. I treated my body like a rodeo, and maybe you were, because we've known you're kind of Northern California effete. There wasn't a lot of,
no, not my hands are,
your hands are soft from counting money your whole life, right? You never really done any physical labor.
Not at all.
You don't really know how to do much.
No, not at all. Not handy on any way, shape, or form. It's just. So maybe, maybe all that energy was saved, if you will. You know what I mean?
Now, let me ask you, if you had to, Mark.
Yeah.
Could you change the battery in your car?
Yeah, I think I could.
Okay.
I've seen it done enough.
Folks, we're going to make this a reality at some point. You're going to go. Mark's going to go out and he's going to go, I better get to over there to the private school before they beat a poor because I'm late. And then
luckily I can walk there. In about 12 minutes.
All right. Well, it'll be another reason why.
Yeah. But, I think I could probably figure that out. But I'm pretty bad. Yeah. There's YouTube. There's always YouTube.
Lenny's right. You can YouTube it. Yeah. It's a good point. Really don't.
That's
so you literally don't have to know anything anymore.
No, you don't. No. I mean, how do you think I did the deep dive?
It's a good point.
I knew a lot about 1972, but it's really about where to dig in whatever research you're doing,
right,
and how to cross-reference. That's really the only sort of experience I bring to the table in terms of researching. Being able to cross-reference something with something else happening either at the same time or thematically happening in terms of the same direction.
Right.
And so that kind of, for me at least, is interesting. But yeah, it's.
And for the years, and this is how I find it, when you're doing a deep dive for a year, I picked 1941 because that was Ted Williams hitting .406. That was DiMaggio's hitting streak. So there was like an event in that year that was something that was spectacular. And I think for 72, and we've talked about this year, the Dolphins were undefeated. There was an Olympics there with a lot going on. So those just huge things where if you choose like 1974 is a little more, it's just you have to go wider because the depth isn't really there. So this one, you could literally spend all your time on the Finns.
Yes.
The Olympics.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. That's a 4-part episode right there. The Olympics,
Yeah,
just
exactly.
the Summer Olympics. Oh, by the way.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah, there's all kinds of amazing things. And what it really showed me, and I really wasn't sure what the through line would be for 1972. What's the theme? What's going to carry me through all this? And I start looking at all the different things we're going to talk about, and it's really a year of firsts.
Okay.
It's really a year of firsts. It's remarkable. It's
right.
It's amazing. It's 1972, and it's this year of firsts. And I have a list right here, in terms of NCAA integration. America's team experienced a first for them. Winning streaks were remarkable in this particular year. Labor strife experienced
first ever where there was a loss of games or something in this.
That's right. There's an MVP trifecta in this year, which has never happened before.
Wow.
Marathons exhibited a first this year. Media coverage had their first. There were Open Championship firsts in multiple sports. And obviously we know about Olympic heights, a lot of firsts there. And of course, Olympic depths. And there were Cold War challenges as well. And we know about some of the obvious ones with the Olympics, but there were others as well that involved first. So really, it is a year of first, Johnny. And I never really figured that out.
I've always said for me, for me, that's not even a surprising thing, because for me, 1972, I turned 8 in July of 1972. And I always tell you, the very first Super Bowl I remember at all anything about, and I was watching a broadcast of it today in preparation for this show. So clearly I've done more work than you have. It was in January of 72, Super Bowl VI. I remember around that hearing a lot, Roger Staubach I grew up in Washington, D.C., military folks everywhere. Annapolis isn't far away. So, he was a hero, even though he went to play for the Cowboys. So, Staubach starting a Super Bowl game was a big deal. And then you had the upstart Dolphins, Don Shula. There were a lot of great stories for that Super Bowl. And so that's really the year that I glommed on to professional sports, football being my first. But I also remember slightly the Orioles and the Pirates in the 71 World Series. So then by 72, now I'm interested in the whole baseball season. So yeah, it was my first year I played organized football, which I did all the way through high school. So yeah, I get it first. Now you were 12, right? You turned 12.
I was 11
most of the year.
So I had really had, it was really kind of my third year.
Yeah, so you're knee deep in it now. You statistics and things. Now, for me,
I'm starting to lock in. Yeah,
aesthetics of the sport were fun, and I'd watch a little football, and then we'd head out to play. Because that was fresh in my mind. But for you now, you probably got some baseball cards. Some statistics. So yeah, you're knee deep in the hoopla.
I really am knee deep in the
hoopla. Song ever.
For sure at this point, but to really outline all the different firsts that happens, it was really remarkable. I came across that idea, maybe that's a theme, and then I started checking off every topic we're going to get into, and sure enough, somewhere in there's a first, and sometimes, Johnny, it's a first and only, which is pretty neat that can still be the case 48 years later. So let's get into this a little bit. We'll start at the top of the year. January 1 with the Orange Bowl. It's Alabama and Nebraska. And I'm telling you, Nebraska, of course, has Johnny Rodgers, who would win the Heisman the next year. Nebraska beats Alabama 38-6, and they're number 1. Alabama was number 2 going in. With Alabama, this is the first we can talk about. Now, Taylor said this earlier. She said this is the first January 1st. Of 1972. I said there's actually 366 days that are firsts. If you think about it that way, it was a leap year. But Alabama, do you realize this, Johnny? All the stuff we've heard about Bear Bryant, this was actually the first year, 71, 72, is when he actually started having any of his African-American players see any playing time at all.
Yeah, I'm fairly familiar. There's a great documentary about Bear Bryant arranging a game with USC and his good friend John McVay to come play in Alabama. And they had not traditionally invited integrated teams for a very long time. Now, I think they'd gotten past that, but they still didn't have any players on their varsity squad. I think they might have had a couple of practice players who had walked onto the team. But in any case, USC just ran all over. Sam Cunningham, who I remember very, very well from USC, I'm sure you do as well, ran all over them. And that was, many people say the Bear did that to put the pressure on those forces in Alabama that wouldn't allow him to integrate by saying, we need the best athletes regardless of their race. And Alabama, again, did do that. I believe it was the very first Alabama varsity football crap. I knew his name. In any case, I've forgotten it up to this point, but it's an interesting story, and it's a deep dive for another day. Frankly, I could get into that.
It is. And to your point, I always thought sort of Bear Bryant was ahead of the curve. And I guess he was. This is not necessarily saying he wasn't, but it had to be in the decade of the 70s for crying out loud before they saw any playing time. They may have been on the team, may have been on the roster, but before they saw any playing time was 71, 72. They trash him 38-6. Johnny Rodgers has this phenomenal punt return of about 73 yards. And this is Bob Devaney, who's coaching the Cornhuskers. They had gone undefeated. They had won 20 in a row. Every game they played that year, they won by 24 points or more. It was one of the most dominant college football squads ever, with the exception of one game when they played Oklahoma back in Thanksgiving in 1971.
Right.
They called it the game of the century.
One of many.
One of many games of the centuries. But this one truly was, because it was 1-2 at the time. And Oklahoma actually gave him a game. It was 35-31. Do you remember who was coaching that Oklahoma team, Johnny? Back in 71, 72?
Crap. It was just before.
Future coach of the New England Patriots.
It was Chuck Fairbanks. Did I lose you?
I lost you at the second, so we probably lost each other. Yes, what'd you say?
Chuck Fairbanks?
You got it. Nice job.
Yeah.
Chuck Fairbanks. And it's so funny because this was really a game of the century in the sense that it's 1-2, right?
Yeah.
Nebraska's dominating everyone they play. So is Oklahoma. Nebraska has the number one defense in the land.
I know the rest of this.
And guess who has the number one offense in the
Oklahoma.
land? And you know what it was? What was their setup? What did they do when they ran the ball? What was their formation?
Wishbone.
That's absolutely right. You know what they did? They averaged 472 yards a game.
Yeah, it was
rushing.
It was insane. It was insane. In fact, Bear Bryant, back to Bear Bryant, after this, he came to his coaches and said, we have to learn to run triple option because that's the future of football, which it was in the early 70s. And isn't it interesting, Mark, how there are no new things under the sun, how we see in professional football now, something that had been disdained for a long time was that, hey, run pass option stuff and option, that kind of works. Basically, you're not to the extent that colleges did back then, but it's nothing new. It's just rehashing something defenses haven't seen. None of the defensive coordinators now were born when this stuff started.
Exactly. I can remember in 1986, and this is in 86, so this is another 10 years, past its peak, 15 years past its peak, really. 87, actually. This is the second strike season in the National Football League, and they're playing with replacement players. And the 49ers are playing the Giants, and Walsh sets up in a wishbone. And you saw on the sideline Bill Parcells kind of looking at his coaches going, what? And then you see Bill Walsh going, sorry, I'm just trying to do what I'm trying to do here.
Right.
And
hey, by the way, Bill Parcells used to be the head coach at Air Force. And my God, nobody ran the wishbone better than Air Force. So he should have been Fisher to Berry, put that back in at Air Force. So I guess Bill didn't have enough time to watch a lot of college football when he was coaching. But no, that was, again, and probably why my fondness for college football, I started watching it at that time. And that's why, Mark, even though I was a former horrible high school wide receiver, I literally may have been the worst high school football player in America, who with all of his limbs. I have a love for love for the running game.
You really love the running
Probably
game.
because I didn't want him throwing the ball anywhere near me. Because I was afraid then I have to catch. I was Chris Pratt in Moneyball. where he's playing Scott Hatterberg, and he says, "What is it that David Justice says to him?" Because, well, what's your how are you doing? Well, I'm kind of nervous. What's your general fear? And he's like, having the ball anywhere coming in my direction. And it's like, yeah, that was kind of me as a wide receiver. Hand the ball to somebody else.
So perhaps that's the reason. So at any rate, I think you loved it. You loved the running game. You loved the low-scoring football games.
Absolutely,
you loved all that. And as the year progressed, that's going to probably, on some level, you're going to be happy with how the NFL is going. You're going to be happy with how college football is going. As a rule, I think you're pretty happy about that. So what happens coming up January 3rd is the championship games in the National Football League. And in those championship games, the Dallas Cowboys beat the San Francisco 49ers. The Dolphins beat the Baltimore Colts. The funny story about this is that this is the second year I'm really getting into the 49ers, and they make the championship game. They beat the Redskins in that division game to get there, as a matter of fact. Gene Washington had a touchdown, a great touchdown catch at Candlestick Park against the Redskins in the divisional round. And I was so excited. And it's January 2nd is this game, January 2nd. And I run into my parents' bedroom in the morning before it starts, and I'm just shaking my dad, saying, "Hey, it's the championship game. Hey, it's the champ." And I'm thinking to myself, this guy is raising 4 kids. He's like a vice principal. He's working his ass off.
Yeah.
This is a few days he has left. He probably partied hard on New Year's Eve, still probably recovering. And here's this kid just shaking him and waking him up at 7 a.m.
Dad, come on. I got a feeling we're not going to score a touchdown in this game. Oh my God. I got a feeling it's just a field goal for us.
And you probably should put some money on that.
And they didn't. It was 14-3. They didn't score. And the Dolphins beat the Colts 21-0. So the losing teams in both championship games did not score a touchdown. But and ironically, neither did the Dolphins in the Super Bowl. They only got 3 points. Dallas defeats them in the Super Bowl. Roger Staubach is the MVP. But the first with this one, Johnny, is that Dallas got over the hump.
Yeah.
Dallas finally won the big one. They had not won the big one, and they had really been tagged, and I think appropriately so, frankly, with not being able to win the big game, kind of choking in the big games. Starting from 1966 on.
Right. 66 and 67, they had opportunity to go to a Super Bowl I, Super Bowl II, and they lost them both, one at home and one in the famous Ice Bowl. They were. It's interesting because with this loss, Shula now becomes a 2-time loser too, and he was obviously known for coaching, the biggest upset in Super Bowl history. So I guess something had to give in that situation.
Yeah, no, I mean, he was the losing coach in the biggest upset in Super Bowl history, Shula, and now he goes to another team and loses as well, 24-3. What's interesting about this, we know about 67-66 for the Packers and the Cowboys, and you kind of go, okay, it's in Lambeau, the Ice Bowl is one of them. You get it. The Cowboys are just, starting to emerge from expansion. The Packers are the Packers, for crying out loud. But 1968 rolls around, and all we remember in the National Football League, we're not talking about the Jets, but the NFL, all we remember in 68 are the Colts, right? 13-1, just running through everyone to get to the Super Bowl. But we forget, and I know I forgot, that the Cowboys were 12-2, okay? And their differential, they had 245 point differential. That 17.5 points a game is their average margin of victory, and it's barely less than the Baltimore Colts. So they're 12-2. The Colts are 13-1. Everyone expects that to be the championship game, to see who gets into Super Bowl III, and they lose the first game. Don Meredith throws 3 interceptions in his first 9 attempts. Is benched. Craig Morton comes in there, throws another. They lose 3 more via the fumble. They have 7 turnovers. They just choke. And then the next year, they're 11-2-1, and they lose to Cleveland again in the divisional round. Now, granted, both those years, Baltimore first and then Minnesota were more dominant, but barely. But you really had this idea with the Cowboys that they couldn't quite do it. And then 70, they finally get there, and they lose the Super Bowl then. So this is a first. This is yet one more first. The Cowboys finally win their first Super Bowl, finally get over the hump. Tom Landry is not a total clam anymore, and they're on their way to becoming America's team. I mean, that's pretty much the case. And
then they're also on their way to being the only NFC team to win a World's Championship in the 1970s. This starts a long run of domination for the AFC with back-to-back Miami wins,
back-to-back
Steeler wins, the Oakland Raiders, then back to the Steelers, and then you get the only thing in between there was in 77 you get the Cowboys again, and we talked on the show previously about the aforementioned Craig Morton, who, by the way, it should be mentioned during this we're talking more about 71 than we should, but this was the season where we talked about it, where at one point they were rotating quarterbacks by play early in this season, in the 71 season.
Yeah. All in all, isn't that ironic, John, that the season that had the most Sturm and Drang is the one they ended up winning a championship with? You know, the previous season they're just blowing through the opposition.
Right. And it's interesting because I do want to jump back to your championship, your NFC championship game for a minute. The 49er defense played really well in that game. Frankly.
Sure.
I mean, there's the interception by George Andre, which is like the biggest play in that game, gives the Cowboys the football. I think like the 2.
No, it is. It's John Brody just,
right. But they chased Roger Staubach around a lot. They put him on his butt a couple of times or more.
Yeah, but they chased him around on third down, and he usually got it.
The interesting thing about this is the reason that the quarterback controversy happened for so long in Dallas is that everybody says Craig Morton was an extension of Tom Landry, because Tom Landry was the very buttoned up, run the system. We're going to do it our way. And Staubach was anything but. I mean, improvisation was the key to Staubach's game. And they couldn't get over the hump until Tom Landry could surrender some of that, which he really wanted to do. And I just want to bring it up to today and say, what was the discussion about Bruce Arians and Tom Brady for half of this season was, Bruce Arians trying to put a square peg through a round hole. And now they've found something. So there you go. There's my tie-in to Super Bowl 55.
I like it. Outstanding work out of you. All right, so
I could talk about this playoff season all day long. It's incredibly interesting to me. But
I agree.
We need to move on.
No, I agree. It's amazing.
And it's a bad Super Bowl game. It is a bad game.
It's one of the worst.
It's so interesting.
The season is fascinating. 71 really could be another year we dive into as well at some point in time. But
lots going on there.
This is 72. This is the NFL in 72, and we've covered the championship games. We've covered the Super Bowl. So now we're going to stay in January, however, Johnny, and go back to January 7th, and we're going to switch sports. We're going to go to the National Basketball Association, where on that day, January 7th, the Los Angeles Lakers won their 33rd consecutive game. This 71-72 team was nuts. There's Wilt Chamberlain. There's Jerry West. Bill Sharman was the coach. Gail Goodrich was on that team. Unbelievable. And it's interesting because Elgin Hayes, I believe, is the guy. Elvin Hayes retired. Well,
no. Okay, I think somebody different. I'm thinking former Washington Bullet Elvin Hayes. That's not who it is.
No, so maybe it was Baylor then that kind of backed off, and Jim McMillan got more of the time because he was basically ready to retire. Baylor was, and so Jim McMillan gets a little bit more time. Sharman makes Chamberlain the captain of the team, which is not normally what he, and they get these shoot-arounds in the morning. Sharman had to go to Chamberlain and ask him, do you want to be the captain, number one, and do you want to get up early in the morning for these shoot-arounds? And he said, I don't like getting up in the morning, but he decided to do it. And literally since that decision, that was November 5th of 71, 33 consecutive games. And I think this is one of the most underrated statistics of all time.
I think it part of it
comes it will never be broken.
No, and I think part of it is because we have a tendency to, and boy, I tell you, it's changed for me working for the Raptors now, is we so devalue the regular season in the National Basketball Association.
Right.
You know, when you watch a like a highlight thing from back then, 30 minutes, you know, it's maybe 10 minutes on the regular season, and the last 20 minutes are, you know, what happened in the playoffs, because it does have an you know, extended playoff. But I think that's part of it. And I agree with you. 33 wins in a row. It is, to wrap your head around it. I mean, you're just going to have a cold shooting night, right? I mean, doesn't that, you know, something happens to prevent.
And it's interesting, and we'll get into this later in part 2 and part 3 in terms of some of their postseason things. We got most of that happening in part 1, but not all of it. But they lost their first game in the Western Conference Finals against the Bucks, who, oh, by the way, were in the West back then with a MVP, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Right.
And they lost game 1 to the Knicks in the finals as well. So yes, that can happen. But Johnny, you realize since 1972, there's only been 2 teams in the National Basketball Association that have even gotten halfway there. And a little bit more than halfway there, but it's like, let's see, the Celtics won 18 straight in 82, so that's a little bit more than halfway. 18, though. They're still 15 away.
Right.
And then Chicago, in their run, they had, in the year they won 72 ball games, by the way. The Lakers won 69 this year, and Chicago actually beat that record in 1996. They ran off 18 as well. So 2 teams have gotten 18, including the 72-win 96 Chicago Bulls.
Again, you wrap your head around what has to happen. You know, you have to stay healthy. And I don't mean, you know, season-ending injury, but guys miss a couple of games with a quad strain or something. So you have to be able to overcome. Have either that doesn't happen for almost 2 months, probably probably 10 weeks. It doesn't happen more than that, 11, 12 weeks. Or you're deep enough to get over that. And again, as I said, Mark, every now and again, you have a bad shooting night.
No, seriously.
You know what I mean?
Like, what? No, seriously. It's like, how do you do this for 33? How do you even stay that interested?
It's nuts.
Right? You know, what about managed time and all the other stuff they do these days? You know, managing, you know, making sure Chamberlain and West have enough juice in the tank for the playoffs. It's just nuts.
Yeah.
So do you know what the record was prior? And of course, it's the only thing that comes close to it. There was a record that was set, you know, roughly 50 years before that. Any idea? That was close. It wasn't 33, but it was pretty close.
Obviously in a different sport.
In a different sport.
Yeah,
baseball.
well, it's got to be. I'm thinking 27 Yankees.
Even earlier than that.
25.
The previous decade.
1918.
1916. And involved a team with the Christian gentleman at the helm.
Oh, the New York Giants.
26 in a row.
Wow.
20. One of them was a tie. So they didn't lose for 20. So it's just remarkable to me.
It really is. It really, and you're right. It's not discussed. And I really do think it is because, you know, when we think the NBA, the regular season is just about positioning yourself for the playoffs. And we don't really think of it in terms of that, you know, I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, you can't.
If they'd won 32 of 33, I would be just amazed by it.
Right. But we can't wrap our head around it, which is why it's so underappreciated, because we can't even think about it. That's the thing. We can't even think about it. All right.
In fact, we should not be talking about it anymore. Move on.
We should. We are going to move on. We're going to stay in January now, but we're going to move on to another sport, and that's the National Hockey League, where Bobby Orr is dominating, and so are the Boston Bruins. How many games did they lose in January of 72, you think, John? Boston Bruins.
I'm going to say they in the month of January?
In the month of January.
I'm going to say they didn't lose any games.
They lost one. They lost one game in the month of January. Bobby Orr is on his way to a historic season that we will get to in just a bit, but this is a remarkable run by these guys, and this is a team that pretty much no one could beat. They were so dominant. They have Phil Esposito as well. And just the whole Bobby Orr thing. I mean, just the whole Bobby Orr thing. He's a defenseman, Johnny, and he twice led the league in scoring.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that's ever happened.
No, he was one of those guys who redefined the game, the offensive defenseman. I mean, I know it sounds like an oxymoron at this point, but positions were more well defined before that, and you didn't have people who broke out and did that. It was like the first time, in the NBA, all of a sudden you have Magic Johnson, who's a 6'9" point guard who can, play small forward, big forward. He just really kind of transformed what people thought was possible, changed the game.
There's this great story about him last year with the Bruins. He's banged. His knees are shot.
Right.
This guy's career ended. Well, I mean, it was double digit length. So in hockey those days, to last that long, it's probably
sure. Yeah.
And he started pretty young, but he was still pretty young, but his knees were shot. And Boston was making one final gasp. This is like against the Flyers, and the Flyers are now the big dog in town. So this is 74, 75-ish. And it's game 6 to tie the series, right? Game 6. And it's there's an empty, they're playing, it's an empty net. Mm-hmm. And he is able to block a shot into the empty net. All right, with his leg. Gets the puck and is able to go the length of the ice and do a slap shot, and it was literally 2 seconds left in the game, and it was like a half an inch hit the post, half an inch from going in. I mean, it's that kind of thing that Bobby Orr could do.
Yeah.
He could be a great defenseman and a great scorer at the same time.
Right.
Anyway, Boston's having a great time. They only lose one game in January, and then as a matter of fact, January 25th happens. The NHL All-Star Game happens, and Bobby Orr is the MVP. In world events in January, we can't ignore that, Johnny.
No, we shouldn't.
Sports is designed to keep our mind away, and frankly, for one of the first times ever, sports actually brought the world into everything later on in the year in a very tragic way. We'll get into that. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. But on January 25th, this is pretty neat. Shirley Chisholm, who is the only the first black congressperson, oh, by the way, is then the first African-American woman to announce her candidacy, and she announces her candidacy in 1972. And this is one of her quotes. Just a great, great lady, highly historical. Oh, yeah. Yet another first, Johnny. Another first in 1972. In January, we've already had a first with African-American players in Alabama in the national championship game. We've had a first with the Dallas Cowboys finally winning a Super Bowl. We have some firsts with the Bruins coming up later, but now we have this first as well with Shirley Chisholm. And then following that, and this is one of the major tragedies, this was Bloody Sunday in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
Claimed a lot of lives. It was the British soldiers just, opening up fire on these protesters who they claimed at the time, which is why they were acquitted, that they were armed and they were, their lives were in danger. And of course, upon further investigation, they weren't armed.
Right.
And this really was the crux of the IRA and the British terrorism campaign back and forth. What do they call it? The troubled times.
The Troubles.
The Troubles, just the Troubles, yes.
Well, and I think it's interesting, too, because I always bring this up when people start, getting into their anti-Islam stuff and saying, they were pointing out they're extremists in every religion, and they're always like, well, yeah, but they don't resort to violence. And I was like, do you ever do your homework on Northern Ireland? Because that's what it came down to, was Protestants and Catholics there. And thankfully, they were able to get their way around it. But this is Sunday Bloody Sunday for U2 fans. This is what it's referring to. Yeah.
No doubt about it. All right, we're done with January. A lot of firsts in January. We're moving on, and we're going back to the NFL, of course, because they're never out of the spotlight too long, even back in 1972. And you know what I figured, Johnny, is that I didn't do the draft in 68, and I know in 41 it doesn't wrap, but I thought let's do what was the draft like in 1972?
Ooh.
Well, there was only one Hall of Famer picked. That was Franco.
Wow, only Hall of Famer pick. Cliff Branch not in, Brian Sipe, two of the other two players.
Two of the really good players.
Yeah.
Really good players. Leroy Kelly, I think, was in that. And
terrific player.
And Willie Buchanan was in that. Some great players. Let me I'll give you some of the other names. Ahmad Rashad, Reggie McKenzie.
Oh my goodness.
I'm sorry, Lydell Mitchell, Jeff Seaman,
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence McCutcheon. These are good players. Very good
they
players,
are
Pro Bowlers.
Yeah.
But the only Hall of Famer was Franco Harris. And it's interesting because that 72 and 77 are the only years, Johnny, that only one Hall of Famer is picked from the class. Every other year in the 1970s, at least two, and oftentimes 4 or 5.
Right.
Oftentimes 4 or 5. And so that's pretty interesting that was the draft. Franco Harris, number 13 overall in the first round.
Probably more than anything due to the fact that Harris gets there and they become so dominant that nobody from any other teams were thought of.
There you go.
They win 4 in 5 years. In 4 and 6 years. They are the team of the decade, obviously. So, Franco keeping everybody else out of the Hall of Fame.
All right, so we're moving on to February 8th now, and on February 8th in Major League Baseball, we're going to move sports as well. You have Josh Gibson and Buck Leonard. Not Buck Gibson and Josh Leonard. No, Josh Gibson,
different
Buck
people
Leonard.
than I went to college with.
Indeed, selected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Now, the year before, Bowie Kuhn, to his credit, had said that athletes from the Negro Leagues need to be in the Hall of Fame. But the way he said it, see, he could never do anything good without stepping over himself. Bowie.
Right. Well, yeah.
And so when he made this big announcement in 1971, he said that former Negro League players would have a separate wing in the Hall of Fame.
Yep.
And clearly,
there's a
then,
Family Guy flashback that happens right now. If we had that kind of money, that would, and you could only imagine what the wing would look like. It would be like Uncle Remus coming out of it if it were Bowie Kuhn's mind, for God's sake. Good Lord. I always remember Bowie Kuhn. Do you remember Bowie Kuhn back when the reserve clause thing was going on and the court case went in their way? And there's an interview with Bowie Kuhn that says, well, we never forget the important place the player makes up in the game. And I'm thinking, the whole fucking thing, Bowie. We never forget the player's point, but we think if we just built the stadium and sold dogs and beers, people would show. Maybe not all of them.
Yeah,
please, Jack.
No, it's amazing. It's amazing because people finally said, "Hang on, Bowie. This is a separate but equal Jim Crow thing,
right?
You're proposing."
Right. As long as they go in a different door, I'm fine with it.
And that's what Satchel Paige said. He said, I'm just as good as the white boys. I ain't going in the back door of the Hall of Fame.
He was right.
He was right.
Of course he was.
He was absolutely right. And I apologize if that was too cultural appropriating of me in that moment. But no, he was, he tried to do the right thing.
Well,
he was,
that he tried to do the right thing. Bear Bryant waited till 1971 to
71 to get these people to going. All right, so we're going to stick to baseball, and on the same month, February 25th, Steve Carlton was traded for Rick Wise. Now, Rick Wise had a pretty good career.
Not a bad player. Played over a decade, I believe. Rick Wise.
Well, yeah,
he was a contributing guy. A couple times. All-star.
Played well in the 75 Red Sox, got him to the World Series, pitched well in the playoffs, and didn't pitch well, got torched in the World Series. But
you know what he wasn't, though, Mark? You know what he wasn't?
Steve Carlton. Who, oh, by the way, this year, and we'll get into this later on in part 3, but he wins 27 games and the Phillies win 59.
That's the year. Yes, it's the great.
That's the year.
Great. It really.
That's the year.
Amazing.
So good job, Philadelphia Phillies, making that trade. Outstanding work.
The Los Angeles Lakers won more games in a row than the rest of the Phillies pitching staff. They won 32, and the Lakers won 33 in a row. That should just give you an idea.
Yeah.
Right there.
Remarkable.
Really
Unbelievable, remarkable dominance in a year where they were one of the worst teams, not just in 1972, but ever. And I think 27, almost wins half their games.
And I think to your point, we often bring up, and we brought this up during 41, the records that'll never be broken. And a starting pitcher winning, 45% of his team's games will never happen again.
That will never happen.
There's no chance unless it's a shortened season.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
We'll
it's
see.
amazing.
That might have happened sometime this year. Who knows what it was?
Yeah.
Hank Aaron also became the first player to get $200,000 in a year, believe it or not, in 1972. Things were changing. So this was the first. This was a first for him as well, and the first for Major League Baseball. $200,000 a year, and $600,000 over 3 years, which is I think about $3.7 million.
Could
Still
you imagine?
peanuts.
Could you imagine what Sean Hannity would have reacted about if that had happened? Could you imagine just the whining and the crying? Good Lord.
No, I know. He might actually come to the defense of teachers. They are making, look what they're doing for our kids, and this well-tanned athlete who really hasn't worked hard for anything, has natural ability because, well, you know what happened. Ask Jimmy the Greek. I mean, you know, exactly.
Yeah. So
I mean, you know, nothing's changed.
No.
Nothing's changed. In
Things
terms
don't
of,
nothing new under the sun.
That's true. That's true. All right. So we're going to switch sports, but we're going to stay in February now. And the Winter Olympics are held in Japan from the 3rd to the 13th in Japan. It's the first time, by the way, first time that they're held in Japan. First time, in other words, that the Winter Olympics have not been in North America or Europe. So that's a first as well.
Asian Winter Olympics.
And the Canadian team decides to boycott because they are not allowed to use NHL players. And they think it's unfair because clearly Eastern European players and the USSR are able to do that. Now, the USSR and the European players are able to, you know, work the system, if you will, and say they're amateurs because they're working for the government.
They're in the Army. And basically, they're called the Red Army team. They put them in the
Red Army team. That's that.
And they had uniforms, but they had nothing. So they were paid their army salary to play hockey. Yeah, I mean, it was a nice way around it. I did not know this. You've now educated me on something I did not know this, and I'm a little disappointed the Canadians whining about it at this point because I thought it was better when there weren't professional players playing against those Soviet teams. That's what made the upsets what they were.
Right. That's what made the upset. As a matter of fact, there was an upset this year. The U.S. team was not considered a favorite at all to do anything. They were maybe considered to finish 5th or 6th in the tournament, and they ended up finishing 2nd. So they call that sort of the minor miracle on ice in 1972. As a matter of fact, Canada didn't even go back in 1976. That's how pissed off they were at not being able to use NHL. And also, Canada versus Russia this year, there was a big game, a big hockey game as well, and Canada was just kind of losing all kinds of momentum in terms of being the country that ice hockey. This is the country for ice hockey. The rest of the world had caught up to them, and they were upset. So they boycotted 72 and 76 Winter Olympics.
Started producing a lot of great comedians and actors, though, at this point in time. So the hockey players, apparently, they decided to move on to stage and screen.
They did, and good for them.
Yeah.
In February, John, how many games did the Bruins lose in February?
1.
They lost 1 game. Nice work.
Johnny learns.
1 game. Yes, he does. He does. All right, so let's do a few current events in February as well, and this is a biggie. You know what's coming up here for our current events. Richard Nixon going to China.
Remember it vividly.
I do too, and it was the 21st through the 28th. Unprecedented, as we know, first time. It's a lot of first. We're already in February. We've got a half a dozen firsts. It feels
unbelievable.
Like. U.S. President, unprecedented 8-day trip. Never happened before with the U.S. president. Visits Mao Zedong, and they do their thing. They have dinner.
I believe that's Zhou Enlai with him on the top there, which was like the next guy in charge. I think Zhou Enlai, which when I was a kid, I thought his name was Joanne Lai, because when they would talk about it, but he was like the prime minister, whereas Mao was like the godhead over there. But I remember it vividly. Again, it was all over television.
You see Taylor's comment. Johnny learns. Johnny does learn.
I have the comments there. I've got this on big screen. I need to do that. Johnny does learn from time to time.
Johnny does learn. So that's a big deal. And all right. So now we're into March. We're halfway through part 1 of 1972. All kinds of firsts. And we have another first coming up in March, Johnny. And it's the first time that baseball's reserve clause is argued before the Supreme Court in terms of whether or not they should keep their antitrust exemption. Remember,
Right.
in 1922, it was argued, and that's when the Supreme Court said they should have an antitrust exemption. Let me give you the name of that case, which is hilarious. Federal Baseball Club versus National League.
Okay.
It just sounds so completely targeted against, the players just by the name of the
of course
case.
it is. Yeah. Is that
So
Arthur
anyway-
Goldberg? Is that Arthur Goldberg who's arguing?
That was
this?
Arthur Goldberg attacks the reserve clause, Johnny.
Former
There's
member
Kurt
of the
Flood.
yeah,
Deep
former-
dive. There
Captain.
could be a 6-part episode on Kurt Flood. We have a great documentary on him. And there's Bowie Kuhn, who was a very competent lawyer in his own right, decided not to argue the case. But the arguments were made today or on March 20th. And on June 19th, the decision was made. So that's part 2 of 1972. So you want to stay tuned for part 2 of the 1972 deep dive. That's what they call a tease, Johnny.
All right, fair enough. I thought we'd get through March because I was all worked up for the 72 NCAA basketball tournament.
We're going to.
I did some homework, and here's a little more of the tease. I looked at some of the coaches of the teams in 72.
Ooh, nice.
And there are some very, very surprising names in there.
Well, that's going to be fun because you know what? That's the next thing in March that we get to. This was March 20th. The very next thing is March 25th, which is the NCAA championship, where the Bruins go on to beat Florida State.
And Florida State, of the Bruins run, their immaculate run, this Florida State team, which comes out of nowhere in very surprising manner, they actually
Give them a game.
Gave them the best game that they'd had throughout that tournament. That was the fewest number of points that they'd won a national championship.
They were 30-0 that year, UCLA.
Yeah.
The average score, and people that don't like numbers, people that don't understand statistics, you will get this. 95-64 is the average score for 30 games. That is remarkable dominance.
It really is.
And Florida State got within 5 points in the game. It was 81-76.
Yeah.
This had Bill Walton was a sophomore, Johnny. Jamal Wilkes was a sophomore. Henry Bibby was a senior on this team. Yep. And this was they had lost the year before to Notre Dame.
They ended the streak.
Well, no, there was.
Oh no, that was later. That was later. Yes,
exactly. Right. This was actually this was their 45th consecutive win.
I see. Okay,
they went 30-0 this year. They would go 30-0 in 1973 to 75. They'd win their first 13 games in 74 to go 88, and of course, then again, the Irish beat them by 1 point. Digger Phelps in 1974. Which is remarkable. So, yeah, this is their 45th consecutive win. This is their 6th consecutive national championship. I mean, talk about things that will never happen again.
No, it's pretty remarkable. Now, I mean, you can certainly look in the rear view mirror and see they had a few things going their way that would be frowned upon today. The Coach Wooden was never caught up in it, but they had some alumni and people who were helping players out, shall we say. But I mean, how much of that did you really have to do? Because if you're a 5-star recruit coming out of high school in the late 60s into the early 70s, what other school would you choose if they offered you a scholarship? That's the thing.
Plus, a lot of these kids are coming out of the projects, are coming out of dire poverty situations, and they need to have maybe every, one night a month, a pizza night, to have some sort of semblance of a college experience.
Well, and again, there's a great documentary on it, but their parents are going to have the electricity cut off. I mean, there are all kinds of things that were going on.
Exactly, dude.
But,
exactly.
But again, I think to argue that the talent wouldn't have come to UCLA. Of course they were. It's like Alabama now. Everybody talks about how hard it is for Nick Saban to recruit. I don't think Nick Saban has to. I mean, I know he does, but how much does he really have to do versus the head coach at Wyoming, for the love of God? First of all, you got to be anywhere but Wyoming.
The head coach in Kentucky in the same conference.
Yeah,
crying out loud.
Exactly.
You know, a major Division I SEC school.
Right.
You know, the gulf between that and Alabama is
And
remarkable.
it was the same for UCLA. It was the same
exactly,
for
but
UCLA.
still, John, it's still, and they still had to win 4 games in the tournament. It hadn't expanded quite as large as it is now, but still, 6 in a row.
Yeah.
And they won a 7th in 73. They lost in 74, and then they won again in 75 before Wooden retired. But so tell me some of the other coaches in the tournament that year.
Yeah, it was so great. I just looked through the brackets, and I started in the East region. Of course, North Carolina. Dean Smith was at North Carolina at that time. The Penn Quakers, Mark. The Penn Quakers had a coach who's a future multiple NBA championship coach, Chuck Daly, coaching the Penn Quakers at that point in time. Now, Frank McGuire, for those of you who don't know as much about college basketball, is he was Mike Krzyzewski before Mike Krzyzewski. He was there with Duke in the 60s when Duke was a dominant team, and then they fell off after McGuire left because he had some issue with the other people running the school, and he ended up at South Carolina, so he's there as well. The Florida State head coach was Hugh Durham, which I didn't realize. When I went to Florida in the 80s, Hugh Durham was at Georgia. He was excellent college basketball coach at Georgia. Adolph Rupp was still in Kentucky, unhappy, I'm sure, about the forward-moving social justice. Marquette had the great Al McGuire, who in 5 years is going to win a national championship.
That's true. Love Al McGuire.
Bill Musselman is at Minnesota. Many coaches will reach out. Musselman, maybe not a no,
I remember him.
A name that everybody remembers. And this is the one. Denny Crum was at Louisville. I didn't know Denny came that early. Actually, that surprised me. But at Houston, Guy Lewis was at Houston already, and Guy Lewis is the head coach for Phi Slamma Jamma coming up. 11 years later, he's still there. Nobody stays 11 years. And at Long Beach State, there was a young towel-chewing guy coaching that team. Jerry Tarkanian was at Long Beach State at that time. So just look through at those coaching things. That is so much fun to do. But when I saw Chuck Daly was head coach of the Penn Quakers,
unbelievable.
It's just amazing.
It is amazing. Now, I have to say, in terms of the comments out there, my nephew, Peter Winiger, is saying that his son, which is by definition my great nephew, who's less than 1 year old, I think he's around 10 months old at this point in time, probably 10. And he's highly entertained. He is highly entertained by our show, John. So what does that say? That a 10-month-old is highly entertained. I take it as a win. Personally, I take that as a win. And now I don't hear you, unfortunately. So you may not hear me as well. At some point in time, we'll hear each other. I'm sure it's my internet with all the stuff I have going on here. All right, so here we go. Let's move on. Johnny? All right, so now we're going to current events. And current events, we get to, what you mentioned earlier with Adolph Rupp. And I don't see Johnny on the screen right now, so I'm just going to continue to do this. Adolph Rupp, not happy with the social justice of the day. Well, on March 3rd of 1972, guess what happens? That's right. Stone Mountain carved. Was this honoring the Confederacy at the time? A few years after the ignominious defeat, this complete beatdown. Did they come out in the 1860s or the 1870s with a memorial? No, it's 1972, well over 100 years later. For strictly intimidation purposes, sculpted figures of Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson.
I'm back.
Are completed at Stone Mountain. I'm glad you are back because do you see what we're doing right now?
Yeah, that's got some Borglum's carving on Stone Mountain.
That's Stone Mountain, Johnny. Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson. Completed March 3rd of 1972. I was telling the folks that, is it a Confederate memorial for folks that had just suffered an ignominious defeat, a horrible beatdown, a classic beatdown, maybe in the late 1860s, maybe early 1870s, to honor family members and the pride that they had that they don't have anymore. No, it's over 100 years later.
Yeah.
And it's strictly done for intimidation purposes. Jefferson Davis, really, the head of the government that took up arms against the flag no one wants burned. Robert E. Lee, the general, and Stonewall Jackson, who couldn't even, get out of the way of his own men. So,
the interesting thing about that as a guy who follows the Civil War is that one of the ways you would know that didn't happen immediately following the Civil War was the inclusion of Jefferson Davis. Because one of the things that happened after that war was because of the military history in the South, and they sent, there was a much richer military history for Southerners. Rich Southerners' second sons were always the ones. First sons would take over the family business, which is enslaving people, and then the second son would go on to military school, and that was kind of the way that society worked. So at the end of the war, they couldn't blame the generals, so they had to blame the politicians. So Jefferson Davis was not well thought of throughout the South up to that point. But then the lost cause narrative, catches effect. And then it was just all, it's because we didn't have enough people. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so,
all right. So there it is. On the 15th, The Godfather premieres. It's a nice little bit of cultural history right there. 1972 was a first in a lot of ways. Wouldn't you agree, John, in terms of cinema?
Yeah.
A major first.
Absolutely. And the studios pushed back the entire time. They saw the brushes with what Brando was doing, and they didn't like Pacino. And there was a lot of pushback on that movie. A lot of pushback.
On March 22nd, the 92nd U.S. Congress votes to send the proposed Equal Rights Amendment to states for verification, Johnny. So that means two-thirds of the Congress and 2/3 of the Senate ratified this baby.
Mm-hmm.
2/3.
Yep.
That's not 60.
Right.
Okay. That's more than that. It is 2/3 of the Congress, 2/3. Now, granted, everything was Democratic back then in a pretty major way, but still,
Sure was.
That's a 66% of 66.6% of the Congress and the Senate had to ratify it. They sent it to the states, and a lot of them ratified it, and then it just stalled. It just stalled like in the early 80s. And apparently it's getting some life now, but boy, oh boy, I don't know what the problem was. What's the problem with
80s,
that?
The early 80s.
Yeah. How about that,
like,
Johnny?
Gosh.
Yeah. What's the denominator?
People who don't have access to economic growth.
Yeah. And hang on. But prior to that, the middle class was sort of progressing at the same rate as
then
the
it just
upper.
kind of stopped
And then there was this huge division that started. That division started what, January of 81-ish?
Yeah, towards the end of the month, third week of January, 1981 could be
around the time that Iran hostages were let go.
Something like that. Anyway, it's an interesting history.
How about that?
Fingers crossed, we'll get it past. In the
who knows?
Yeah,
we're ready to go to April, Johnny. We're ready to go to April. We're back to baseball now. Yay, we're going to start the season. It's baseball. Hope springs eternal. No. The first strike ever. The first Major League Baseball strike ever. There's Marvin Miller in the lower right.
Apparently
corner.
Marvin Hamlish over his left shoulder, oddly. Not really sure where he'd written the official strike song for the Union.
That actually is Joe Torre next to him. You see him?
It is
That's
Joe Torre.
Joe Torre.
Yes, it is. That? And I think that's Jerry. Is that Jerry Koosman? Maybe
it could be
closest to us.
And that's a very young Riley Claremont there on the left. Very sad that baseball hasn't come back in 1972.
Yeah.
And Behringer, Pena, Wills. I don't even know what team
Wilhelm.
that is.
Good Lord.
Yeah, that's interesting. Anyway, 1972, first time that happened. And they were arguing about pensions. They were arguing about arbitration. and they were able to settle it after about 10. Actually, it was between 6 and 9 games that were lost.
Yeah. Not everybody lost the same number of games, which I guess in baseball makes more sense. But
yeah, and that was a problem, though, because at the end of the year, Detroit, who had played more games than Boston, won the division by a half a game.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, because the owner said, no, we're not going to give you the money for the time you struck.
Of course
not. But they were able to kind of get some arbitration going their way, the players, and they got some pension. So you get a Hank Aaron in 72 with 200,000. You get a little bit further down the road with arbitration and pension, and you get the argument before the Supreme Court. And we will tell you what happened in June. I mean, we will tell you that in part 2. But believe it or not, that court case led to everything else in the future, even though we'll see. We won't talk about it. You want to stay tuned for part 2 of 1972 to see what happens. But that's April 1st is when that strike commences. 6 to 9 games for each team. It wasn't the same amount of games. It's hilarious.
How many third-rate sports writers throughout the country for their April 2nd headline referenced, hey, we're going to play a whole season. April Fools. How many do you think? I mean, I think it's like every third crap sports writer in America used that.
You're pretty generous there. I would go 2/3 actually.
All right, fair enough.
Because they're just eating the ham sandwiches and the hot dogs and the coleslaw. And
hey, anybody going to eat this sandwich in the trash? No, how about it?
Right. No, sports baseball writers are the worst. We've talked about this, and we will never not talk about this.
Oh, I know.
It's the truth. All right, so we're back to the NBA. It's April. It's the 9th through the 22nd. It's the Western Conference Finals I alluded to earlier. And it's a classic matchup, Johnny, because it's Kareem against Wilt Chamberlain. Now, Kareem's the MVP this year, and it's Wilt Chamberlain who's having a great year. Jerry West, Oscar Robertson. It's a classic matchup. It goes 6 games, and the Lakers win. But they lost the first game, like I said. It's easy to lose focus in the course of a season that, if you count the playoffs, lasts well over 100 games. And yet for 33 games, they didn't do that. But it was a classic between the old and the new, between the up and coming and the old guard. And sure enough, Jabbar completely took that mantle and ran with it. There is no doubt about it. In terms of the top 5 players of all time, I would say both Chamberlain and Jabbar are in there.
I think that was just the case that year of Jabbar was a great player and probably the most talented player not named Jerry West on that court. And you can argue that they're both, equally talented. But the Lakers are just a better team than Milwaukee.
Yeah,
They're just more good players. To your point, Elgin Baylor is losing playing time, for God's sake.
Yeah, I didn't think he played at all from the end of October through the rest of the season.
Really? Not at all? Didn't get any?
No, not at all. I don't think so. And Jabbar and those Bucks were the defending world champions as well. So this is pretty fun stuff. This is when Milwaukee was in the West. So we're going to keep going in April, and we're back to hockey. We're back to the Bruins and Bobby Orr. So this is what Bobby Orr. The finals are in May, John. So we're going to talk about the Stanley Cup Finals in part 2 of 1972. But to get here, the quarters and the semis that took the Bruins 9 games, okay? And Bobby Orr, a defenseman has 16 points in those 9 games. Essentially 2 points a game through the course of those 2 series. And he's on his way to achieving another huge first that we'll get to in part 2. No doubt about it. All right, April's a pretty fun month in 1972. You know what happens in Augusta? I don't know if you know this. I think you do.
I do, yeah, of course. Jack Nicklaus.
There he is, Jack Nicklaus. He wins the Masters again. This is his 10th major overall. Now, it's his 12th if you count the
U.S. Amateur.
The amateurs,
Which
exactly.
they used to, but they don't.
Which they used to back in the day. And it's his 4th Masters overall. And he shoots a .286, wins by 3 strokes. I believe it was wire-to-wire win for Jack Nicklaus.
And I think
72.
Speaking of amateurs, I think Ben Crenshaw was your low amateur that year in that.
Love that.
He makes his debut onto the stage in Augusta in 72. Yeah. I remember this.
Right.
I remember this.
I do too. I remember it very well. And this is all you coming on. This is your first blush of sports. Everything's a first for John Pelkey.
Yeah, it really is.
1972.
Really is.
I mean, how perfect is that? It's a year of firsts, and everything was a first for John in 1972.
That's so true. Yeah,
Johnny in 1972.
We watched the majors. That was big in my house, and we had Jack Nicklaus fans. So not as big as Arnie. They were bigger Arnie fans, but at this point, I think Arnie gets a good round in 73. Coming up, Arnold Palmer has one of those, 40 somethings who go out and have the round, and we're all like, "Ooh, we can just hope." But Jack Nicklaus certainly he was must see viewing long before anybody else.
It's interesting because I would go and visit my grandparents a lot, and my gramps really was the influence in my life for the most part that got me into sports. My dad brought me to my first baseball game. I think it was 69 with
by
the
mistake
Montreal Expos. It might have been because they were an expansion team. They weren't even supposed to be there. They weren't even supposed to be there.
Right.
But I was brought to a lot of games in 71, first playoff game against the Pirates for my birthday. He got me he got me a seat at Candlestick Park. He got me a seat, I think I've told you this, at Kezar Stadium for the last game played there, which was the championship game between the Cowboys and the 49ers in 1970.
Right.
I got that. He was a major influence. And there would be Sundays where we would watch the final round of majors at his house. And he loved Arnie.
Yeah.
I mean, in 1960,
everybody loved Arnie.
Yeah, 1960, Gramps is 51 years old. So by 66, 67, he's in his mid-50s. Arnie's his guy.
Of course.
Jack is the up-and-comer who's not well-liked, at least in the Miller household.
Right.
And
he's not well-liked a lot of places because he took over for Arnie.
Exactly. And I didn't like him either. I was always rooting for Arnold Palmer, and I was never rooting for Jack Nicklaus. And I can remember that. But by that point, it was so obvious that Jack Nicklaus was the guy and was amazing. And he would have a very good year in 1972, among a lot of great years. Actually, it was a bit of a comeback for him. He kind of had a career slump a little bit in the late 60s, early 70s. And this is a year where he kind of comes back. So it's
number 9 and 72, and I know where this is headed with this. And the winners of all the majors, no matter how many there are, hint, hint, all fun names. And all guys you could talk about for.
I can't wait, and I can't wait in part 2 to talk
any
about
of those guys for the full length of a deep dive.
No doubt about it. And
Amazing.
There's a first that Jack Nicholson achieves. His next major that we will talk about in part 2, another first. There's a lot of firsts, and there's plenty of firsts coming up in part 2. You want to stay tuned for that, folks out there.
Do we even know when to tell them that?
All
is?
right.
Is that
we're going to wrap it up with this in April? I don't know. Next Wednesday. What the hell?
Okay. All right. I wasn't
sure.
sure.
You're right. Good call, Johnny. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds fun. I'm fine with that.
I'm not sure either. Either.
Fair enough.
Yeah, me too.
Stay tuned to all the shows from now on.
We have to have a show Monday, obviously, talking about the Super Bowl.
Yeah, of course. Yes. Just stay on, folks.
At some point, folks, we've only done 116 episodes. At some point, we will get our shit together. At some point,
why would we want that? Why would anyone want that?
Right. Why would anyone want that?
Right, exactly.
All right. So this is the last bit for part 1 of 1972, a year of first. So there's another first coming up as we end our episode. First year, the Boston Marathon, Johnny, officially allowed women to participate. 1972.
Mm-hmm.
Can you believe that?
Yeah, there's that famous photo of the young lady trying to run. Is this 71?
No, this is 67.
Is it that early? I can remember. She's trying to run it, and they are removing her. I think the guy...
They're trying to, but they don't.
Yeah, I think
There's two officials, and then her teammates from Syracuse take care of it and get them out of the way, and she's able to finish the race, believe it or not. But what happened is this, is in before 72, right? Women had been barred from the Boston Marathon.
Right.
But it didn't keep them from running. In 1966, this is great stuff. Roberta Gibb, okay. She hasn't registered. She hasn't done anything. She hides behind a bush. All right. She hides behind a bush.
Probably Marvin.
At the start of the Boston Marathon. And she sneaks onto the field and finishes the race like in about 3 hours, 20 minutes.
So there's that argument.
The following year, exactly. The following year, number 261, and that's the picture we're looking at, 261. The Boston Marathon was assigned to entrant. Her name is Catherine Switzer, but she registered as KV Switzer. K period, V period, Switzer. And then in lieu of, there was a pre-race medical examination, evidently, that they would have. So her coach took a health certificate to race officials and picked up the number himself. So they had no idea it was a woman.
Wow.
I just love that. Such a great story.
Yeah.
Not until 2 miles into the race did the officials realize that Switzer was a woman. And she's from Syracuse University. So Will Cloney, the race director.
That's him right
That
in
guy.
the jacket, right?
Yeah. And this Jock Semple is the other guy. These guys are idiots. Yeah, the guy in the jacket, and then there's another dude. See the guy in the hat down the lower left?
Yeah.
They're trying to get her off the course.
Pretty sure that's
And what
Konstantin
happens-
Chernyenko, actually. I'm
It very much looks like
103% sure it's Konstantin Chernyenko.
And they tried to remove her from the course, but at the very least, John, they tried to remove her number.
Right.
Can you imagine trying to grab someone's bib as they're running? A female, by the way.
Yeah,
And
well-
she's 20 and you're like, 87.
The thing is, Mark, it would be acceptable at that time for them to walk into a bar and grab a woman's number there, but it would not be acceptable for a woman to run in the Boston Marathon. Yeah, just idiotic. My question to you, Mark, is that percentage of sports writers who did the April Fool's joke, how many of them in the newspaper the next day said something like, KV, what's the V stand for? Vagina? Because
Gosh.
they probably couldn't say that, but that's
They couldn't say that, but they would say, what does the V stand for? And just let it slide.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
they
Wink,
couldn't-
wink, nudge,
Yeah.
nudge.
Wink,
Eh?
wink, nudge, nudge. Well, what the good news is her Syracuse, she was a student at Syracuse, 20 years old. Her Syracuse teammates pushed those assholes off
Yeah.
the course.
Right.
And she was able to finish it as well. And that was in 67. And then because those pictures were published,
Mhm.
people were outraged. So it only took 5 years to change it.
Right. Right. Exactly. Well, hold on.
So, it's just how it goes.
And by the way, Mark, again,
the arc of justice bends towards history, but very
it bends
slowly.
towards commerce for the
Very
love.
slowly.
It bends towards commerce for the love of crap.
And again,
you know
commerce, justice bends towards, it does. You're right.
Why-
Commerce bends
wait a
towards
minute.
justice.
Wait a minute. We are over 50% of people. We're not allowing them to sign up for this race. They probably got like 3,000 more people in the damn race after that. Now, I'm going to be in trouble by Dave McGilvery, who is the head of the Boston Marathon, or was the head of all the people I know in the running community, because I don't know how many people run the Boston Marathon. I'm sorry, I don't know. And I don't know the answer to these questions. But it just seems, and looking back at that, it seems so bizarre. And again, I will stick with my with my pronouncement, Mark, that if one of those guys had walked into a bar and grabbed a woman's breasts, he would be accepted more than a man who stood up and said, I think women should be able to run in the Boston Marathon. That's what those days were like. What are you, freak? They can't do that.
It's good stuff. I'm happy that there are people watching our show that don't know other people that are watching our show and yet are connecting. We are a social media site, John. They are connecting with each other and enjoying each other and catching up with each other and telling them how much of a fan they are, or this or that.
Well, if
So
can
we
bring
are
people
we are
together.
acting as a social media. They're not watching the show.
Right.
They're not listening to what we have to say, but we are acting as a social media site.
So what you're saying, Mark, is if you found yourself in some way denied access to a social media site, hey, come on over. Come on by.
Yes, come on. We will be here for you.
We'll host
All
you.
of those folks that can't.
We'll
get
host you
on.
bigly. We'll host you bigly.
We will. You've never seen anything like it, ladies and
Never
gentlemen.
seen anything like
There's
it.
never been anything like it at all. All
People
right,
said it couldn't be done, and we did it. I mean, that's the thing.
lots of people.
Some
Lots
people
of
say it's the best that's ever been done. Some people
are telling me that we can't get any better than that. I don't know how Len Ellison knows Peter, Mom, but we'll find out at some point in time. So I want to say this. We've talked about first, Johnny, NCAA football integration. We're talking about that. America's team, the Cowboys. Some winning streaks we've mentioned, but there will be more in parts 2 and 3. Labor strife we've mentioned, but we will find the conclusion of that in part 2. MVP trifecta we have not gotten to. Marathons we got to. Media coverage firsts we have not got to. Open championships we have not gone to as well. Obviously, Olympic heights and depths, as well as Cold War challenges. All that to come in part 2 and 3. Stay tuned for 1972. And that concludes that, Johnny. And now we can banter after this if we want to. At least promo Derek Abbott coming up on Friday.
Yeah, we got Derek Abbott coming up on Friday. And Mark, that was very entertaining. And I'm sorry if I chimed in too much, but I started looking into this.
No, you were great.
It's such a great year in sports. And again, certain things that maybe the first things we talk about, we've talked about that I remember firsthand, since most of the things we did were, prior to the Benjamin Harrison administration. But the one thing that I think is funny in sports today, the thing that struck me was now the rumor of Andrew Luck coming back in the quarterback carousel. Everyone had spun the wheel and had sent Deshaun Watson to every team and every possible thing. So we needed something else to jump back in, and it's that Andrew Luck considering unretiring now that the Colts have a championship caliber defense.
Sure. I like that. And I like the fact that Derek Carr is now up for grabs, supposedly. So now Oakland could be in the running for Deshaun Watson as well. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Right. And if
we'll
anybody
have a lot to talk about, Johnny, in between our deep dives.
If anybody would go full on Jerry Burns and literally trade everything, Derek Carr, anyone else that plays for the team, the buffet at the Bellagio, Lake Mead, John Gruden would be the guy to get Deshaun Watson, because what everybody says about John Gruden, Mark, I know you've heard this as well, is that he spends most of the time on the sidelines looking over at the other team going, man, if I had them, boy, I'd really be winning big. And he's constantly
I'm sorry, that would be a great story.
Derek Carr, yeah.
If Deshaun Watson ends up in Vegas. Personally.
And Derek Carr ends up back where his brother basically paid the price for being paid the starting quarterback for an expansion for
paid the price, paid a lot of people's prices.
Yeah, yes, he sure did.
All right, so there we go. We got Derek Abbott on Friday. Apparently, he's had an epic fight with his dad, which we can't wait to talk about. Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can pull up the. Okay, so it's going to be a fun show. The week-long war, not just a fight, a war that he's had with his father. Doesn't even call him his dad, calls him his father.
Mm-hmm.
About team building with the Rams and Lions, and whether passing the ball is more important than running. You can imagine. And I said we should get Keith on as a point counterpoint.
That is listen. Again, when this happened, when that trade happened, I was as excited as I could be, because this is something we could talk about. We'll be talking about until the end of next season and beyond. Well, did they give too much? Is this a smart thing? Will Goff be the quarterback? It's just a great story. And now that we know Andrew Luck is coming back to the Colts, it just gets better and better. I love it. We can get in the middle of the war.
Yeah, he says his dad hates Benny Snell, but wants the Steelers to run the ball more, because that's who the Steelers are, a power football team. Okay, well, again, there's plenty of problems with the way progressives think, John. I can go on and on, but the way conservatives think, and I'm giving equal time here. If you can't let go of something. That hasn't been the case for 15 years since Ben Roethlisberger got there, basically. That's pretty funny, and I feel bad for you. I really do.
Hey, Dave, how's the new car? The Lexus? It's okay. Oh, just okay? Yeah, man, it ain't my 74 Plymouth Fury. That was a car. That's what you get a lot of. We're a power running team. By the way, like 2/3 of the people on that power running team dead. So can we move on? It's generationally. We're multi-generations away from that.
That's who they are, though, John. That's who they are.
That's who they have to be. None of the circus can't come to town here. We're blue-collar people.
All right, folks, we are going to exit now. We'll be back on Friday with Derek Abbott previewing the Super Bowl for John Pelkey and Jeff Taylor. I'm Mark Ferrer. There is no sign of Jeff Taylor, so hopefully this broadcast will end If not, it's at some point in time, it will run out of steam 2-3 hours from now.
Well, I'm gonna be doing my yoga behind me soon, so let's hope the camera turns off. So.
That does it. That does it for us. Thank you for checking it out, folks, and we'll talk to you in a couple of days. Bye.